Hi, I have a question for you. You may have seen this picture before. This is Dale Gardner, NASA astronaut and naval flight officer who, in 1984, posed for this photo in space after completing a mission. This isn't AI generated, it's an impressive shot that seems innocent enough at first. However, it has consistently reignited debates about space exploration and competition that have existed long before anyone even stepped foot on the moon. Should there be rules and regulations for space exploration? And if so, does anyone have the right to sell pieces of outer space? How much freedom should individuals and corporations have in their space adventures? This is the story of how one photograph has come to symbolize the most difficult question about space exploration to the present day. Can anyone actually own space? My name is Felix, welcome to What About It? Let's dive right in.
Start, 2, 1, boost ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
In November 1984, the Space Shuttle Discovery made its second trip out of Earth's orbit to complete the groundbreaking STS-51A mission. And why was it groundbreaking? Because this was the first mission ever to recover satellites lost in space. It also underscores the commercial value of salvaging and reusing space assets. The floating objects in question were the Westar 6 and Palapa B2 satellites, which were stranded in orbit because of payload assist module failures, causing them to float in the wrong areas, thus rendering them useless. 2 of the 5 astronauts on board were Commander Dale Gardner and mission specialist Joseph P. Allen, who were tasked with departing the Discovery to retrieve the wayward satellites. To complete their mission, Gardner and Allen used an innovative jetpack-like propulsion system called the Manned Maneuvering Unit to float through space, manually retrieve both satellites, and secure them in Discovery's payload bay before returning to Earth. And before trekking home, Gardner decided to have a little fun. With Allen as his photographer, Gardner posed with the now famous for sale sign to jokingly advertise that they were now on the market again. When you're free-flying attached to an experimental jetpack above Earth on a death-defying space mission, why not lighten the mood with some humor? This light-hearted visual prank soon rekindled debates about the limits of space exploration, which had been going on since far before the original space race. As far as centuries before a man walked on the moon, great minds and thinkers have pondered the idea of space exploration and colonization. Even in 1500 BC, the sacred Indian text the Rig Veda contained hymns describing a vast infinite cosmos. And in the 6th century BCE, ancient Greek philosophers like Anaximander speculated about celestial bodies surrounding the Earth. Thousands of years later, thinkers like the German astronomer and mathematician Johannes Kepler began considering the challenges humans may face if they journeyed to the moon, from environmental conditions to psychological factors. Later on in the 1865 novel From the Earth to the Moon, French author Jules Verne more explicitly envisioned humans inhabiting celestial bodies, writing, "I believe that someday man will reach the moon, travel to other planets and conquer the infinite vastness of the universe." Verne and other thinkers inspired the Russian rocket scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who speculated that in the future humans would need to inhabit space to survive. Was space exploration always destiny for the human race?
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
As one of the defining dramas of the Cold War, the original space race had it all. World superpowers colliding, dazzling new technology, and a really catchy name. While the race was fueled by the dueling ideologies of the United States and its allies against the Soviet Union and theirs, the competition also had serious military ramifications, as both nations had access to nuclear arms. This fact made world leaders more than a little nervous. They thought space could become the next battleground for military and nuclear conflict, with countries duking it out over who could use the moon as a base. In October 1957, the Soviets shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, into orbit. This event marked the beginning of space exploration and opened up many possibilities surrounding space-based weapons. Those worried about Russia's newfound success really panicked 2 days later when the Soviets tested the RDS-37 thermonuclear bomb in what many saw as a big red message. In 1959, the United Nations took action by establishing the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space to address the growing issues surrounding space exploration. Both the Soviets and the American governments decided to play nice and joined. While it didn't have the most memorable acronym, COPUS was the first worldwide platform to ensure space would remain friendly. However, the Soviets and the United States continued conducting lunar missions, leaving many world leaders wondering if either nation would start claiming celestial bodies. After Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit Earth in 1961, the United States ramped up its space game with President John F. Kennedy declaring in September 1962 that his country would make its way to the moon,
and it will be done before the end of this decade.
Always stay goal-oriented. 1 month later, tensions reached a fever pitch when the Soviets aimed nuclear missiles at the United States for its invasion of Cuba. This near catastrophe, appropriately called the Cuban Missile Crisis, was averted after a 13-day standoff when the US agreed to stop invading the Soviet ally as long as they tucked their missiles away. And just like that, the Cold War was over. Okay, maybe not. While avoiding the world's end was a nice start, the rival nations and their allies were still butting heads. One of the growing concerns was issues surrounding space militarization, especially the testing of nuclear weapons on the moon or in outer space, such as the Starfish prime test conducted by the US, which was a high-altitude nuclear explosion. Suddenly, all those sci-fi books people were reading had a chance to become reality. In 1963, with public and political pressure mounting, the Soviets, the US and Great Britain signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which banned nuclear tests in the atmosphere, underwater and outer space. I guess you could still nuke Earth, but progress is progress. However, a framework was still needed to ensure nobody turned the universe into their own personal military base. In 1967, the US, the Soviets and the UK joined forces to sign the Outer Space Treaty, the first legal agreement that laid out the ground rules of space law. And that's where we arrive at the initial question. According to the treaty, space law includes the peaceful use of space, freedom of exploration for all nations, a pact that nobody can use the moon and other celestial bodies for military purpose, and no country can claim land in outer space. Okay. Since its introduction, 115 countries have joined the treaty, with another 22 having signed without ratifying. What are you waiting for, folks? It's going to get crowded up there. After 2 more years of dueling missions, the space race culminated with NASA's Apollo 11 mission in 1969, when astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon. The United States and NASA accomplished what seemed impossible a little more than a decade ago. However, the Outer Space Treaty ensured that just because the United States planted its flag on the moon, it could not claim it like in a game of Risk. Now, this is where it gets really confusing. While countries have generally followed the treaty, there have still been plenty of gray areas over the years. For instance, in the 1980s, the United States tried to develop the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, that would protect the country from nuclear missiles. The SDI even inspired a 1986 video game that predicted a world where the Cold War would never end, leading to a global space arms race. Several nations have also conducted anti-satellite or ASAT tests, which involve using physical or non-kinetic attacks to destroy or disable satellites. These tests worry critics, as they often create large amounts of nasty space debris. The big issue is that floating space junk might damage space non-junk and endanger future missions. And they can also potentially escalate military tensions in galaxies far, far away. For example, Russia has flexed its ASAT muscles several times over the years, most recently in 2021, when it destroyed one of its own satellites, creating a debris field in low Earth orbit. And back in 1985, the US used an F-15 fighter jet to launch an ASAT missile that destroyed the unusable Solwind satellite. China also joined the fray in 2007 when it conducted a highly controversial test by destroying the Fengyun 1C weather satellite. Even India got in on the fun in 2019 with its Shakti mission by destroying a low Earth orbit satellite with a ground-based missile. 2019 also saw the United States announce the formation of the Space Force, its first new military branch in 71 years. The program aims to protect the country's interests in space, provide innovation and economic opportunities, and support military operations through satellites, launch operations, and other assets. While the Space Force is still in its infancy, some feel it's in direct opposition to the Outer Space Treaty and can lead to diplomatic and security concerns. Other countries have also taken steps towards shrinking the gap between their military and space efforts. For example, China has launched several advanced satellites for intelligence and military operations as part of its Gaofen and Yaogen series. India has also launched military-grade satellites such as the RISAT and GSAT series for reconnaissance and navigation purposes. The European Union has also collaborated to boost its satellite-based security systems such as Galileo for navigation and Copernicus for Earth observation. And let's not forget Russia, which has also deployed military satellites through its GLONASS network. More importantly, many believe they are developing or have even launched a nuclear space-based ASAT weapon that can potentially wipe out hundreds of satellites via radiation. Just understand that since many of these countries' space developments are tied to long-term strategies, they tend to keep information secret. Could more geopolitical drama be on the horizon? And it gets even trickier. According to many governments and agreements, nations cannot own space. However, what if someone unrelated to the government has a Wild West settler attitude and decides to claim a piece for themselves? Thinking outside the box, these people considered the moon unclaimed land and soon had ideas and dollar signs floating in their heads like lost satellites. The most infamous example is Dennis Hope, an American former car salesman and ventriloquist turned entrepreneur who, in 1980, filed for ownership of the moon, as in the entire thing, recognizing that the Outer Space Treaty did not explicitly forbid private individuals from owning celestial bodies. Hope formed a business called the Lunar Embassy Corporation to sell plots of land on the moon and various planets, including Mars and Venus. And sell he has. Though the sales are not legally binding, or are they? Hope has claimed to have issued deeds to over 6 million people, including Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and various celebrities. The galactic government's self-proclaimed head cheese is even selling all of Pluto for the incredibly reasonable price of $250,000 American dollars. What's the square footage on that? And Hope is not the only person to lay claim to land outside of Earth. Over the years, there have been many cases of individual citizens claiming some or all parts of the entire galaxy. The Wild West wagon track is moving. There was Arthur Dean Lindsay, who claimed not just the moon, but all celestial objects in 1936. There was also James T. Mangan, who in 1949 founded what he called the Nation of Celestial Space, declaring himself the owner of space areas of outer space. Talking about vague wording. He even issued coins for his micronation. Now that's what you call a serious come-up. Or how about Martin Jürgens, the German man who claimed that he and his family rightfully owned the moon, because Prussian Emperor Frederick the Great awarded it to one of his ancestors all the way back in 1756. Is this a valid claim? In 1953, a Chilean lawyer and poet named Genaro Gallardo Vera registered a deed to the moon in his home country. Official documents have been issued. Several urban legends have spread about Vera, most famously that Richard Nixon himself contacted him in 1969 to ask permission for Apollo 11 to enter his property. There have also been other companies that have sold plots of space land to either people in on the joke or folks keeping their fingers crossed for an extraterrestrial real estate boom. One of these companies, the Interplanetary Development Corporation, was even investigated by the New York District Attorney's Office for fraud. Who would have thought? Most space lawyers, talking about a cool job title, agree that even though the Outer Space Treaty doesn't explicitly state individuals cannot possess outer space real estate, these claims of ownership would get quickly tossed in court. Tough break. However, as outlandish as some of these claims may sound, they raise some serious questions about the nature of the Outer Space Treaty. If some random person can get rich selling plots on the moon, imagine what some of the most influential companies in the world can do. Over the last 2+ decades, a new space race has begun, not just among countries but corporations. In the year 2000, Amazon creator and billionaire Jeff Bezos quietly founded Blue Origin, a private aerospace company that sought to enable millions of people to live and work in space for the benefit of the planet. Initially keeping a low profile, Bezos self-funded this venture as it slowly began to take off. Meanwhile, innovator and businessman Elon Musk, then simply a multi-millionaire, also had his sights set beyond the sky. In 2002, he founded SpaceX, another private company with the mission of reducing space travel costs and making life multi-planetary, starting with Mars. Can he own Mars? And if he can, would it be rightful, whatever that might mean in outer space? In 2004, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen joined forces with Scaled Composites founder Burt Rutten to fund Spaceship One, the first privately funded craft to reach space and win the coveted Ansari X Prize. It was now clear that the world's most influential tech titans could wield their influence and capital to new heights. Suddenly, a new space race, or gold rush, was upon us and has been accelerating ever since. Our problem of ownership is growing. While old and new space races are rooted in scientific and technological innovation, their driving forces differ fundamentally. The first space race was a government-funded geopolitical grudge match driven by military strategy. Meanwhile, the modern version has seen private companies become extraterrestrial trendsetters. And while Musk and Bezos, among others, think of space exploration as a canvas for profit and innovation, they also envision it as the next frontier, a necessity for turning humanity into a cosmic species and securing its future. But can humanity trust them without a legal basis? Only 2 years after Spaceship One, SpaceX got to work on its Falcon family of rockets. They were designed as low-cost, partially reusable launch vehicles that would later revolutionize the private spaceflight sector. In 2006, Musk's company launched the Falcon 1 for the first time. However, not everything went according to plan. In fact, it actually exploded. After 2 more failed launches brought SpaceX to the brink of bankruptcy, the company finally struck gold in 2008, when the Falcon 1 became the first private liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit. A new era had begun, where private companies could not only go toe-to-toe with national space programs, but send them spiraling out of gravity. Since then, SpaceX has led the charge in the modern space race. Thus far, the main reason for this success has been the Falcon 9 rocket. Some say that sequels never top the original. But in this case, they might be wrong. Introduced in 2010, the Falcon 9 has been arguably the most revolutionary development in space exploration since the Apollo missions, mainly due to the spacecraft's incredible reusability. It gives private entities the access they need to claim space. The Falcon 9 is also central to SpaceX's Starlink project, a global internet service with over 6,700 satellites in orbit. It has already generated billions of dollars in revenue, proving once and for all that space-based businesses can swing some serious profits. SpaceX is launching the Falcon 9 at an unprecedented frequency. In 2022, it tied the Soviet Union's 1980 record of 61 successful launches in a year. In 2023, it shattered that mark with 96 launches. And in 2024, it soared again with an earth-shattering 138 launches. Pretty soon it will be a surprise when a day passes that a Falcon 9 doesn't leave Earth. And while Blue Origin may be trailing SpaceX in the modern space race, it is still making some major advancements. One of them is the New Shepard, which since 2021 has launched multiple crewed flights, taking those willing and able to pay a hefty fee into space, alongside special guests like Captain Kirk himself and recently even world-famous singer Katy Perry. Blue Origin has also launched its prized and long-awaited New Glenn, a reusable rocket that will compete directly with SpaceX's Falcon 9. Another sign that some are willing to invest serious money to race to space. The question is why? What's their true motive? As for future plans, one area where the founders of Blue Origin and SpaceX differ is how humanity will settle in space in the long term. Bezos' vision focuses on establishing large-scale manufacturing and industry in space, while preserving Earth as a healthy residential planet. For instance, Blue Origin's orbital manufacturing has already begun setting up Orbital Reef, a low-orbit space station the company envisions as a mixed-use business park for microgravity manufacturing, research, and tourism. Musk, on the other hand, feels Earth's days are numbered and foresees a time when a part of humanity leaves and never comes back after making a 230 million kilometer trek across the solar system. And he's already bringing others along on the trip. In 2021, SpaceX launched its first smallsat rideshare mission, which allows commercial and government customers to purchase room on Falcon rockets to carry small satellites. And while NASA might be on the brink of potentially finding evidence of ancient life on Mars with its Curiosity and Perseverance rovers, SpaceX seeks to establish new life there for the future and beyond. It's doing so by leading the charge to establish a self-sustaining colony on Mars, especially through the efforts of its Starship, the most ambitious spacecraft in aerospace to date. Designed to be fully reusable with payload capacities already topping 100 tons, Starship is the centerpiece of Musk's vision. In fact, Starship is expected to surpass the legendary Saturn V rocket in payload capacity, with the potential to carry up to 250 tons in its expendable mode, brick by brick laying the foundation for a potential unsolvable question. Who will own this eventual city on Mars? Musk? The US? Martians? Before anyone relocates for good, space tourism is currently an activity for the super-duper wealthy. But one day, companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin hope that leaving Earth's orbit will be cheaper than a trip to Disneyland. Which, if you've seen Mickey's prices lately, might not be too far off. SpaceX has already slashed launch costs dramatically, from approximately $54,000 per kilogram in the space shuttle era to roughly $2,500 per kilogram with Falcon 9. However, they aren't finished yet. Eventually, the company hopes its Starship rocket will send people to space for as little as $10 per kilogram in what would be the deal of the millennium. Real estate on the red planet, anyone? With developments happening as quickly as the Parker Solar Probe, where will they all lead? And if problems arise, who will solve them? Another big question for the modern space race is lunar mining. Ever thought about that? In 2015, the US passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, allowing its citizens and private companies to dig away and extract those sweet, sweet space resources. Japan, the UAE, and tiny but industrious Luxembourg have followed suit, passing laws that allow entrepreneurs to beam up and strike gold. This helped open the floodgates for lunar mining, with many companies setting their sights on the skies to recharge our resources here on Earth. Whether it's asteroids, Mars, or the Moon, outer space is a treasure trove ripe for the picking. It could greatly benefit all of humanity if we could tap into it without conflict. Some also feel that this could open a Pandora's box that starkly contrasts the Outer Space Treaty's principle that space resources are the province of all mankind. No matter what you believe, these may be the most relevant developments to keep your eye on as the century rolls on. While SpaceX and Blue Origin might be all the rage with the cool space kids, don't forget about the MVP of the original race. I'm talking about NASA. In 2017, NASA launched the Artemis program, which hopes to send astronauts back to the moon for the first time since 1972. And guess who's going to help them? Understanding the shifting dynamics of space exploration and the private sector's central role, the US government has once again opened the books and signed checks accordingly. In this new era, a total reliance on government-run space programs is no longer the norm. Since then, SpaceX, Blue Origin and other companies have signed major contracts with the government to continue evolving space exploration. In April 2021, SpaceX was awarded $2.9 billion to develop a lunar variant of its Starship called the Starship Human Landing System, which hopes to send astronauts back to the moon. Then in 2023, Blue Origin landed a $3.4 billion contract to construct the Blue Origin lunar lander with the moon in their sight line as well. All, of course, to stay sustainably. And then there's iSpace, a company that has a contract with NASA to mine lunar regolith, aka the space dust covering the moon, and sell it back to NASA once they are finished. This deal is part of NASA's plan to purchase the rights to future moon samples recovered from private companies. But how can they sell it back to NASA if they never owned it in the first place? With more government dollars at stake, other companies are attempting to wrestle future contracts away from the big two, but that will be easier said than done. Remember that photo of Dale Gardner? As fate would have it, the Westar 6 was actually sold to Hong Kong-based AsiaSat in 1990. It is still unknown if Gardner was able to collect a commission. And while that iconic flag planting was done in jest, it foreshadowed the growing role of private industry in space operations. This is a little talked about but big problem moving forward. So, are there solutions in the works? Enter the Artemis Accords. Not to be confused with the aforementioned moon program, the Artemis Accords are a set of principles released by NASA and the US Department of State in 2020, outlining sustainable and responsible space exploration. Sound familiar? Inspired by the Outer Space Treaty, the documents have been signed by 50 countries. And while promising, Russia and China are not on the list and have expressed concerns that these new principles may override the agreement signed over 50 years ago. After all, the Outer Space Treaty was never cancelled. So how will new ventures evolve space exploration? And what role will future legal framework and international treaties play? Whether it's Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planting a flag on the moon, a huckster wheeling and dealing lunar deeds, or a SpaceX developing a self-sustaining colony on Mars, the dream of exploring the cosmos begins with a pioneering spirit and a valid claim. Space exploration is no longer about who gets there first. It's about who will be allowed to build and who won't. So the next time you look in the skies, don't just think about how regular humans will get up there, but when. Because no matter who's breaking ground beyond Earth's orbit, the future is light years above and the possibilities are endless, if you have a good lawyer.